Can Damon resist the allure of Crystal's seductive tactics while remaining loyal to KC, his true mate? The tension mounts as loyalties are tested and secrets unfold. Join us on this thrilling journey of loyalty and betrayal. Don't forget to subscribe. Chapter 32. The cards are scattered. Damon's P.O.V. I quickly got to my feet, not wasting time to brush the dead leaves off that clung to me as I sprinted following KC's scent through the woods. She was not going to get away from me now of all times. She was my mate, and it was time she knew she belonged to me. My heart was racing against the inside of my chest. My wolf aroused. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfading patient enthusiasm, and demanding to have her back in my arms. She was mine. She bore my mark on her shoulder. She was my Lunar, my mate, and mine alone. We were going to complete the mating process whether or not she would kill me for it. As I ran, a lead ball started forming in my stomach, twisting it into knots. Something wasn't right. I sniffed the air cautiously, an involuntary growl vibrating in my chest when I caught a whiff of scents lingering in the air. They were strong and masculine, giving off arousal like a female was in their presence. It could only be my female. With a feral howl, I charged forward, my canines bared and biting my claws flicking out from my fingertips in case I was about to jump into a fight. I don't know if it was just me or my instinct, but I was willing to fight for my mate. Even if she didn't want me in return, I was going to make her want me. Damon. Someone shouted from behind, but I didn't even slow down. The lead ball in my stomach was growing larger, a horrible cramping in my chest. An unsettling scent filled my nose, making me stop abruptly, my feet landing in something hot and wet. I looked down in horror, the hairs on the back of my neck rising to see a small pool of crimson on the ground. A chill in my spine told me that it was KC's. Damon. A different voice called, sounding more urgent. It snapped me out of my phase, but I ignored it once again as I ran forward. My own blood boy. Ahead of me, I could see shadows fading into view and moving quickly away, but they had no defined shape, just blobs of blackness against the already dark scenery. But it was still the same 3 since KC's and to others. With a snarl, I lunged, shifting in mid-air and forcing my forelegs to move me forward with an abnormal speed, the shadows slowly coming closer. My teeth were clenched together tightly, my breath visible in the cool night air. As the shape came into view, I could make out 2 figures, one of them holding something over their shoulder. No doubt the rogues. "Hello, Alpha Forlorn," a deep voice hissed from above. But before I could react, a heavy force came crashing down on me, sending me straight to the ground with a searing pain in my back. I glanced back up to meet a grinning face, a pair of dark brown eyes glaring down at me. "Looking for something, pup?" I snarled at him, trying to snap for his hand that was wrapping around the back of my neck, pinning my head to the ground, his own body flattening mine against the earth. My rage was flaring savagely inside me, eager to be released on an unfortunate soul. The man's grinning face under the moonlight only built up more anger within me. "Well, finders keepers. You want her back? Come and get her," he said before shoving me deeper into the soil as he jumped back and disappeared into the shadows, following the other fading figures. I quickly got to my feet, about to chase after him when another shout beckoned, this time right behind me. "Damon, what the hell are you doing? We've been calling for the past 10 freaking minutes." Ben snapped, his fist clenched tightly by his sides, his veins bulging in his neck. Sweat was already beginning to glisten around his brow. "They took Casey." I yelled furiously as I shifted, ignoring the fact I was stark naked. "I don't have time to be doing whatever you need to do right now." I'm aware they have Miss Blair Z, clearly trying to keep his strained voice calm. They left a note. He held out a thin piece of worn and ripped paper. Black lettering inscribed on the yellowed page. Alpha Fallon, we've given you plenty of time to prepare. Hope your training serves you well. You're going to need it to get your precious little mate back. In one piece. That is. I'm going to be the gentleman I am and give you 20 for hours total to return what your parents stole, and your lovely mate will be returned to you unharmed. Better work quick. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. The young woman is starting to appeal to my appetite. The letter was marked by a few drops of blood. The blood of my mate. I could have sworn you said you didn't have a mate. Ben looked up at me with cold, disappointed eyes, but I ignored him, reading the note for the 4th time. Damon, to my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Tearing my attention away from the blood that mocked me. It doesn't matter what I said. I barked, my jaw tightening as I fought to keep my anger in just a little longer. Right now matters, and right now. A pack of rogues have my mate and are demanding something I don't have. I spat, but the moment I did, the sound of leaves rustling behind me caught my attention, followed by a tiny shriek. I spun around to see Amber standing between the trees, caught surprised by my lack of clothing. A second later, Dan was beside her and let out a gasp of his own before his hand flew up to shield Amber's eyes. What the F happened your clothes, man? Dan exclaimed, keeping his hand over his mate's eyes while using his other hand to halfway cover his own eyes. Most importantly, Amber ruled, placing her hands on her hips yet keeping her eyes still hidden behind Dan's hand. What is that intriguing scent? She cocked an eyebrow. Dan sniffed the air, his mouth slightly gaping before breaking into a smirk. Looks like the lucky man does have something to fight for. A slim grin on Amber's lips. I growled at them, certainly not in the mood to be having the conversation at that moment. Hey guys, there are some tracks, oh dear mother of Kaisi. Maggie began, but the moment she noticed me she screamed before turning around. The color drained from her face. I rolled my eyes, shifting back into my wolf form and staring at them expectantly. Better. I questioned them through the mind link, Dan's hands dropping and Maggie turning back around, still looking pale. If you guys are done being overly self-conscious, we have a problem we have to resolve. Quickly, Ben announced, my ears flicking back in agreement. First things first, gather a party to attack. Making me snarl. We get Casey. But his expression remained solid. Casey can handle herself. She almost took down a male wolf twice her size. She can handle a few pups that are way over their heads. He replied inferently, his voice hinting at my disappointing fight I had with her just last week. The inference to my failure made me glare threateningly up at the older beta. Our main goal is to drive them off of the land. Rogues can be rogues all they want. Amber spoke. Just not on our territory. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Maggie nodded, but who says that I'll keep him off? Dan acknowledged, then nodded, glancing around at us curiously. We should finish discussing this back at the pack house, he said quietly, ushering us in a direction. I looked around warily, odd scents filling my nose, and knowing he was right, I followed a quick pace behind him. Chapter 33 Stolen from the Night Casey SP. OV. The cement floor beneath me was freezing, chilling me straight through the bone. The metal shackles chafed my wrists and neck raw, a burning sensation washing through my body. Blood still flowed freely from my nose, droplets gathering on my lap, reddening the white shirt. The slim, not so large, White dress shirt only covered me from shoulders to knees and barely concealed my body, the outline of my undergarments visible through the light fabrics. "Show yourselves, you freaking cowards," I yelled, my voice hoarse and my mind swimming around my head nauseous lie. "Well, are you afraid a girl's going to kick your asses?" I howled, trying to draw them in. I was left alone in this tiny dark room with no windows. Water. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. It was just me. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. A door. And for stone walls. Guess these people weren't used to having guests. Come on. My voice slowly coming back. I can take you with one clawed paw behind my back. Don't tempt me, sweetheart, a low voice mocked through the door, making my muscles tense. It inched open with a haunting creak, a silhouette standing in the doorway, the light from outside blinding me momentarily. Once my vision adjusted, I glared up at my kidnapper. "You better have a death wish, dude," I threatened, struggling against the restraints. He roared each laugh as he took another step closer, details coming into view. His features were sharp, his skin perfectly tanned but rigid and obscured with wrinkles. His hair was thin, light grey and streaked with white. A devilish goatee lined his square jaw and trailed above his slim lips, twisted into an amused and malicious grin. "Hush, little wolf," he mused, kneeling in front of me. Another growl spilled from my lips as I eyed him like prey, not making any sudden movements. "If you behave like a good little girl, we won't have any problems," he instructed as though he were talking to a child. Slowly, my claws began extending from my fingertips, so carefully that the rogue before me didn't seem to notice. "The only one with a problem here is you," I remarked, "and that problem is me." The rogue chuckled darkly, his cold blue eyes glinting dangerously. I narrowed my eyes at him, my hands gripping the chains tightly, but like normal chains would. They didn't bend or tear. Just my type. He brushed the side of my face with his fingers affectionately, but his touch burned because I was officially a mated wolf. The flashback of the events before my kidnapping only built even more anger inside me. However, before I could snap at his fingers, he firmly grabbed my jaw, forcing me to look up at him. "It would be such a shame if I would have to kill you before I got what I wanted," my jaw beginning to ache from his constricting fingers. Overconfident much, I forced a grin of my own, knowing it would annoy the heck out of him. "Well, I'm sorry to say you're wasting your time. Whatever it is you want, you ain't going to get. I'm not much of a hostage if you're aiming to get the alpha's attention." I couldn't help but spread my smile when his eyebrows rose in disbelief. "Oh, I can't wait to see what hell look like when he realizes I'm right." "Well, see about that, sweetheart," he simply replied, roughly releasing my jaw. He turned his back to me and that's when I launched, trying to shift while thinking the chains would break from my force. I was brutally pulled back, my head snapping back, which was followed by a horrible burning pain consuming my neck. A coughing fit erupted from my lungs, blood seeping out from beneath the cot. "Stupid girl," the rogue scoffed, glancing back at me. "There's no way you'll be able to shift while in those chains. Unless your goal is to decapitate yourself," he chortled as he strolled out, the door slamming behind him and leaving me in the darkness once again. The growl I tried to force out came out like a strangled squeak of a mouse, my throat burning at the effort. I leaned my head back against the wall, the fresh blood reddening the color of my shirt. Breathing heavily to try and refill my empty lungs, I looked down at the clasp around my wrist, carefully studying it. The faint shine in even complete darkness was odd, but it quickly identified what kind of metal it was. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I should have known that when I cowled and tear through them. That stuff is probably the only thing werewolves can't get through. Well, my day just kept getting better and better. What next? You'll have to take a leak with no chance of using a decent bathroom. Probably shouldn't have had all that punch at the dance. Chapter 30 for territories, land and wolf. Damon's key. Ovi. I paced back and forth furiously, the note clenched tightly in one hand, KC's dress in the other, listening to the chatter swarming around the room. All I could feel was emptiness and anxiety. There was an important piece missing from my heart and I hated it way too much. Why did I hate it this much? What the heck did it mean about returning what my parents stole? What did they think I had? But without it, how would I get my mate back unharmed? What are you thinking about over there? Downs voiced or through my mind. I glanced across the room at him while continuing my pacing, noticing him spare a quick glance before returning his attention back to the discussion. What's it to you? The dress being clenched tighter in my fist. I still remember how the thin little piece of material slipped off KC's body, gliding to her feet and revealing her to me. Your face is strained in thought. The note is clenched in one hand so tightly I'm surprised it's not shredded to pieces, and KC's dress is gripped tightly in the other. Someone's looking like the male mate he didn't want to be. His voice taunted and a smirk was tugging at his lips, getting him a weird glance from his red-haired mate. What's your point? Holding the dress tighter as though someone was threatening to take it away from me. My point is that someone seems to deeply care about how little but Kicker. His eyebrows rose as he inhaled, his nose twitching. And that someone smells like a mix of lavender and wood. She might be rubbed up against me, I answered, trying to just stop the conversation. He coughed over a snicker, everyone in the room silencing to look curiously at him. He just shrugged them off and asked them to continue, but Amber was glaring straight at me. And I'm sure that's exactly what happened. Dunn's eyes glinted and I immediately caught his drift, my body stiffening. When I glared fiercely in his direction he winced, but not because of me. Amber was stepping on his toes, her jaw clenched tightly as she glanced back in my direction before back up at her mate. Just by the look on both their faces, it expressed that they were talking to each other through the mind link. Suddenly, the locked door nearly flew off its hinges, with splinters flying across the room. Startled, everyone in the room looked over to the figure standing in the doorway, one very ticked off, very aggressive Diana Blair's E. Almost immediately, her eyes found me, and she stormed towards me with a dark, hateful glare consuming her expression. This is your fault. Grabbing the collar of my shirt sternly. I growled at her how dare she challenge me. Her eyes darted down to the dress in my hand, her expression darkening even more. Yet you still had the balls to mutter, "You worthless Diana." Then yelled from across the room, storming towards us, for crying out loud, "Stand down." He demanded and he gripped her shoulders, prying her off with me and taking part of my shirt with her. "You did this to my daughter." Diana pointed a clawed finger at me, her canines enlarged and bared ferociously. "You did this to the only family I have left." Tears began sliding down Diana's cheeks and KC flashed before my eyes, very much resembling her mother. "Diana, please, it'll be all right." Ben comforted her as he pulled her into his arms, her body trembling tremendously, sobs escaping her lips. My little girl, her voice was lost under more silent tears, Ben doing his best to comfort the grieving mother wolf. All I could do was stand there, watching the poor widow cry on and on. Minutes that felt like hours passed by and the room was deadly silent in an air of mourning. I couldn't take it any more the longer we stood around like this, the longer my mate suffered in the grasp of crazy and bloodthirsty rogues. I stormed out of the room, bringing Casey's dress up to my nose, inhaling her scent. Immediately, a fire burned in the pit of my stomach at her scent. I wanted her, and being away from her before completing that process was murdering me. Wait, I muttered to myself, stopping in my tracks. Casey, mate. Those words weren't matching up correctly in my mind. Why were those words alien to me? I growled, shaking my head, and continued to march forward. I flew out the front door and stormed across the lawn, stopping at the edge of the forest. The full moon casted a silver glow over the trees like a misty blanket. I glared into the depths of the forest before jerking my head back and releasing an ear puppy howl into the night, hoping the roads would receive my threat. Casey SP. OV. My eyelids became heavy, darkness fighting to creep into my vision, but I bullied against it, needing to stay conscious. I couldn't close my eyes while in the grip of a maniacal rogue. Couldn't let my guard down. However, my eyes flew wide open when a distant howl caught my attention. I immediately identified it as Damon's and knew what it meant. So, he did want me after all. About time he became a man and opened his freaking eyes. Too bad 8 years a little late. 6 years late. Is the little wolf hungry? The familiar voice of the lead rogue reviled, the door creaking open again. He stood in the doorway with a large chunk of raw meat in his grip, blood still dripping from it. The smell of the deer carnage hit me immediately and my mouth instantly began watering, but I hid my eagerness from him. Hear that? I nodded my head. More troubles coming. Oh, sweetheart, you're not concerned about your alpha boyfriend, tossing the chunk of meat by my feet. Yes, just a mere pup. Well, I couldn't argue with him about that. You should be very concerned about yourself. To my agent extraordinaire, Mylan Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. My instincts beginning to react to the deer flesh, but I concealed it. Just you wait. The second I break out of these chains will be the worst second of your miserable little life, I spat, tugging on the chains for emphasis. He erupted in laughter before smirking slyly at me. Slowly, he approached me, my eyes following his every movement. His icy eyes chilled me as they studied my long exposed legs, his eyes stopping at my low feminine parts. You're just asking for it, sweetheart, he grunted, licking his lips, but keeping still and fighting the side of me that wanted to shrink back. He grinned at me like he could read my mind and was taking pleasure from my inner fear. Slowly, he retreated out of the room, and the moment he did, my instincts took over and I went for the meat laying on the floor, savagely tearing into it, my wolf savoring the juicy flesh. Stupid wolf instincts. Just then, a cramping formed in my lower stomach, the temperature rising dramatically in the room. My breath becoming ragged and forced. Oh, Shti, you've got to be kidding me. Why now? Why here? This was the worst possible time to be going into heat. Chapter 35 Tame the Bloody Flame KCSP. OV. Sweat dampened my skin from head to toe, drenching my clothing. My breathing came out strained and forced, feeling like the hot temperature in the room was pressing down on my chest. I bit my lip, feeling my fang pierce it, but the pain was swept away with a new wave of cramping in my stomach. Things just don't seem to be going my way, and they just had to get worse. Well, if it's not my favorite rogue, wet in your pants yet? I forced a smirk. Oh, sweetheart, never missing a chance to cuss and spit. He cracked his knuckles loudly as he prowled towards me. He bent down before me, his eyes intensely studying my face. I kept as still as possible, hoping to hide the fact I was suffering my first and most demanding heat. I never like to disappoint. I've noticed. He grinned as he grabbed hold on one of my ankles. I snarled at his touch, trying to tear my foot from his grip, but he held tight. I swung my other leg at him and he snatched my other ankle, his grin widening. "Let go of me." I snarled, trying to swing my claws at him, but I was still bound to the wall. He wrapped an arm around both my feet and used his free hand to reach into his pocket and pull out a knife. "Let's send our mutual friend a little motivation, shall we?" Another rogue walked through the door with a large glass jar in his hands. The rogue with my ankles in hand pressed them against the concrete and ordered his assistant to keep them down. He leaned in closer and grabbed my restrained wrist, holding it close to himself. In one quick movement, the man I hated with a deep passion glided the blade along the inside of my wrist, blood seeping from the long and jagged wound. The henchman placed the jar beneath my bleeding wrist, the clear container collecting my blood. "You son of a BTCH. I screamed at him, the pain consuming the entire length of my arm, and as long as I remained in contact with Silver, my werewolf healing won't have any effect. The leg rogue deeply inhaled, smelling the air as a snake, like grin played his lips. "Smell that, Matt." He turned to his follower behind him who had brought in the jar. "We have a little female going into her first eat on our hands." Both the rogue smiles spread from ear to ear. "What a treat," Doyle the assistant hissed with a wry smile. I growled at the two of them, my glare shifting from one to the other. My mystery rogue finally has a name. "Touch me, and your little buddies will be cleaning your guts off the walls," I threatened through bared teeth. Matt quickly cut me by the chin, turning my head towards him so that I looked him in the eye. "Wouldn't count on it, babe," puckering his lips and making kissing noises. I deepened my growl and he slowly pulled away while Doyle's eyes trained intently on me. I could feel the blood flowing from my arm, both sweat and the crimson liquid steadily dripping into the jar. I felt lightheaded and my arm felt numb and asleep. If they didn't stop soon, it'd be a pile of desert, dry skin and bone. "That should do it," Doyle muttered, dropping my arm and pulling the jar away. Though I wanted to release a sigh in appreciation that blood was starting to slowly circulate back into my head instead of out the wound, I kept quiet as I watched them silently. They sealed the jar and held it up to their faces, almost staring at it with hunger. "This should get your boyfriend's butt in gear," Matt said under his breath, but I knew it was directed at me. "Now rest up, sweetheart. We'll be back for more games." Doyle cackled as he led Matt out, their chuckles echoing behind them and seeping through the closed metal door. Once it locked, I slumped back against the wall, my arms trembling as sweat gathering at my temples. I pulled my legs to my chest, trying to hide my undergarments which were very much exposed through the soaked dress shirt. With sore and tired eyes, I glanced around once more at my cell room. As I studied the grooves and joints of the silver chains, a nightmare dawned on me. What could be worse than realizing your mate was your worst enemy? Your leverage cheated on you. The devil went and mated you, getting kidnapped by rogues, and going into heat when trapped with a whole bunch of sadistic male wolves. It'll tell you. Realizing your only hope of seeing the sunlight again is if your mate comes to your rescue. Damon's key. Bent sat me down at the mahogany table across from a stone, faced Diana, down on my right, Amber beside him. Bent sat down on my left. The rest of the table was occupied with the healer, Jana, and several security members. "Has anyone been able to reach her?" one of the warriors started in a strained whisper. "I mean, through the mind link, of course." Over and over and over again. "Her walls are up," Diana breathed. Amber and Dan were both quick to nod, signaling that they had also tried to do so. "What about that base camp you guys found a few weeks back?" I asked Tywin, head of security, recalling at the meeting informing the pack about the rogues. Accounts several miles out was mentioned. We searched there again tonight. It was completely abandoned. They must have the girl at a different location. Oh, informed. Running a hand through my hair. I was not used to handling situations calmly, not to mention situations in awe, but it was putting me on edge. As life hung in the balance really didn't help much. Where else could they? I was cut short when there was a booming knock at the door, hard enough to rattle the whole house. Diana was first to jump out of her chair and practically fly out of the room. Half the table was up and after her, terrified while praying what may lay behind the door. Dan and Amber. Ben and I were just feet away from the open front door, when a blood-curdling scream filled the air. I pushed past Dan and Amber to see what Diana was gawking at when my eyes landed on a dark red glimmer. My heart hammered against my chest as I moved Diana aside to look at the last jar that was filled completely with what could only be blood. As that Amber trailed off, too scared of the answer to finish. It looks only about a pint and a half maybe. Certainly not enough to say she's dead, Dan said, wrapping his arms around Amber. I cautiously grabbed a jar, the blood still warm. I twisted open it, Diana's hands nervously shaking as they flew to her mouth in anticipation. I inhaled the scent of the blood, my eyes widening at the smells that greeted me: cherry, lavender, and a lot of spice. The scent of Casey's heat was strong enough to make my mouth water, my human figure almost exploding to make way for my wolf and his overpowering instincts. Well, she's most certainly alive, I gulped, feeling the sweat break out on my forehead. The four of them gave me odd looks, but I ignored them and headed back up towards the council room, meeting back with the security and Jana, who eyed the jar mysteriously as I entered with the betas and Diana trailing after me. The rogues left us a little gift, I stated sullenly to the security members. They must really want whatever it was Gabriel and Claire Fallon had of theirs. Owen sighed, leaning back in his chair as he stared intently at my mate's blood. If only I knew what it was they had, I mumbled, running a hand tiredly through my hair. My parents told me everything to know about becoming the alpha of a pack. Too bad I never cared enough to pay attention, and now I was paying for it. I'm sure they mentioned at some point some important item they found or something, but by racking through my brain, I couldn't find it. Wait, Dan Amber perked up, gripping Dan's arm and jerking him awake. Can't you track Casey's scent with her blood? Dan chuckled quietly. Amber, babe, I'm a wolf, not a bloodhound. He laughed. Amber just flicked his shoulder while trying to hide her amused smile. It was a good idea, though. Diana peeped, her face slowly regaining color, but her eyes were glued to the jar in front of me, lost and distant. I've had it. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilban. Hearts out saints her unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Standing from my chair. All we're doing here is sitting around and trying to come up with something, but accomplishing nothing. If any of you would like to join me in my parents' room to look for God, knows what, please do. I snapped, leaving the jar sitting on the table and storming out of the council room, stomping straight towards the vacant, long empty room of my parents. Better start looking somewhere. Right. Chapter 36 Rest in Shackles Damon's P.O.V. My parents' room was by far the largest room in the entire pack house. It consisted of a large bathroom the size of any regular living room, consisting of everything an alpha couple could possibly need or want, including a love seat that uses its name in some literal sense. The bedroom was almost a house of its own. A large king bed draped in silky red tapestry set across from the carefully and skillfully made stone fireplace, engravings etched into the stone. A large red and golden rug covered a large portion of the mahogany hardwood floors. On either side of the fireplace, a glass door granted view to the balcony that looked over the forest and far into the horizon. In the corner diagonal from the bed were a few chairs and a couch, a wide screen pressed against the wall. It was a true masterpiece. It was hell. The room was huge, taking up the entire 5th and top floor. It would be impossible to find not that I knew what it was. I was sure I'd know what it was when I found it. Hasn't been touched since the day of the accident, I said when I sensed Dan coming behind me. He walked up beside me and put a brotherly hand on my shoulder, his eyes wandering solemnly around the room. I heard him inhale deeply before his fingers tightened on my shoulder. I smelled the air, feeling my heart crack just a bit more. Mom's and Dad's scents were faint, but they still lingered in the room. Well, it's got to be in here somewhere. Better start looking. Pulling away and heading towards the bed, starting to rummage around in the side table drawers. I watched Dan out of the corner of my eye head into the bathroom to start his own search in there. Unless the rogues were looking for womanly items or condoms, it wasn't in the side tables. I dropped to my hands and knees and started searching beneath the bed, feeling around for something out of the ordinary. Your parents were a very busy couple. Dude, Dan called from the bathroom. I felt my face turn hot, very awkward way to think of your parents. Hey man, how do you think I was born? I replied with a hint of bitter humor. Dan just returned with a dry chuckle, retreating from the bathroom and heading towards the lounging area. I ran my hand along the bed posts, knocking here and there to try and hear a difference. My eyes lingered lazily to the mattress and the neatly set pillows, and what seemed like a movie began playing behind my eyes. I saw Casey and I in the bed, our bodies concealed under the luxurious red covers. I was straddling over her, my hands tightly gripping the headboard. Her fingers clawed at my back, trailing long red scratches. She moaned, her head tossing back into the pillows. My fingers were tightening around the headboard, the wood beginning to break from the pressure. The other me released a low moan of his own. Yo, Damon, where are you, man? Dan snapped his fingers in front of my eyes, the movie coming to a stop. I shook my head out and glanced at him, giving him a stern look that translated it was nothing he needed to worry about. He gave me a weary look before he turned and continued his search under the cushions. I knew it was the smell of Case Eats heat that was putting my brain into this fog. I blew out a sigh and turned around and faced the fireplace, carefully studying the engravings in the stone. There were odd, cryptic symbols of moons. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Forest scenery, and of course, wolves. I put my hand up against the cool stone, tracing the etchings with my fingers. Again, I dropped to my hands and knees, sticking my head into the fireplace and feeling around, finding nothing but soot and ash, causing me to cough crazily. Maybe if I knew what I was looking for, this would be a whole lot easier, Dan said, leaning against the stonework. I nodded my head in agreement, rubbing my eyes tiredly. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Amber ran in, her eyes bewildered and wide. Ben might be found something, she informed us, holding up a manila folder. What? I demanded, jumping to my feet and storming up to her. She handed me the file as Dan appeared at my side, trying to get a look at the file. Ben found it in an old filing cabinet of his. Apparently, the betas or alphas do a lot of paperwork and recording. Amber nervously shoved her hands into her pockets. My eyes scanned the page, taking in every word. A necklace. My parents found a necklace by the stream bed, and that's what the rogue is going all homicidal about. I growled, raising my eyebrows in question. Not just any necklace, Amber corrected. Neil Armstrong, obviously was a werewolf, brought back rock samples from the moon. Most were turned over to NASA, but he kept a fragment. Over a period of time, he learned it had a special effect on any werewolf who wore it. What do you mean? Dan questioned, crossing his arms and looking intrigued. When wearing it, all their abilities were heightened. The healing process was twice as fast. Speed increased. Strength increased. Sight, sense of smell all increased. The mind link widened and allowed communication to even wolves outside the immediate pack. Great. Now we know why it's so important. And now we know what we're looking for. Dunn half grinned. But the corners of my lips forced themselves into a frown. Wait a second. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Milburn, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. My throat suddenly going dry. I strode back to the fireplace and pulled down a picture of my parents from the shelf, feeling a pang of emptiness before showing Amber the picture. The necklace didn't happen to look like this, did it? I pointed to the silver chain that hung around my mother's neck. At the end was a locket. Half black, half gold with engravings that symbolized the moon and the sun. Amber glanced into the file, flipping through pages and landing on one. Yeah, that's it. She confirmed before giving me a quizzical look. Then we have a problem. Looking blankly down at the portrait of my parents. My mother was buried with that necklace. KCSP. OV. I was roasting in a freaking microwave. I was being cooked alive from this starving, unfed heat. My arm, however, was numb. The blood had stopped flowing, the cut caked with dry, flaking crimson. My head rested tiredly against the wall, my body too tired to support my own weight. There I was, underground somewhere, chained like an animal, in daisyism, in the dark, barely any food or water. Strands of damp hair hung limp in front of my face. All those bobby pins that kept my hair up at the dance probably were long gone in the woods. Or not. I growled in frustration at myself. How could I have not thought of that before? I mean, I watched Criminal Minds and NCIS only every weekend end. I felt around the floor blindly, clasping the first bobby pin my fingers brushed. I placed the pin between my teeth and squinted hard at the right shackle, searching for the lock. I inserted the pin into the lock, locating the pressure points and waiting for the clicks. The shackle dropped to the floor with a clank. With my hand free, I frantically grabbed the pin from my mouth and fumbled with it to try and unlift the collar. The pin gave way and snapped from the pressure. I cursed under my breath before I groped the floor for another one, forcing it into the lock and picking the other piece out before finding the vachamical test. There were 2 small clicks. I just had to get that one last one. Come on, you little, I hissed, unable to get it. But then the door flew open with a bang and I quickly pulled the pin back out and slipped it under me, keeping my free hand close to my body, the chain close, too, in hopes Doyle won't notice. Hello again, sweetheart, Doyle grinned, strolling towards me. I kept my face cold, avoiding any emotion, even when I noticed the knife gripped in his hand. I eyed him quietly, my hands behind my back and my knees against my chest, looking more like an animal ready to strike than a kidnapped and defenseless girl. I wouldn't be playing the damsel in distress this time. Doyle kneeled in front of me, gruffly grabbing me by the collar. However, I kept my expression cold. I want to hear you scream, he snarled through gritted teeth, a smile slowly growing. With his free hand, he grabbed my foot and yanked it out straight, then my other foot, sitting on my legs to keep them outstretched. I clenched my teeth, feeling a sensation in my eyes, a flicker. I just knew they were glowing silver with passionate anger and hate. Will you scream for me, sweetheart? Go to hell, I sneered, exhibiting my feral fangs. Doyle just let out a chuckle before he swiped the knife down the front of my shirt, exposing my lingerie even more than it already was. "You're going to scream," Doyle threatened, "and I'm going to make that happen." I smiled at him like an innocent child. "Not before you." My claws flicked out, and with my freed hand, I swiped it across his face, a grunt emanating from Doyle's chest. "How do you get out, Yush?" He didn't get to finish his cursing before I got my legs out from under him and wrapped them around his shoulders, twisting my hips with a half jump and getting the devil under me, the chain attached to my neck, however, uncomfortably hanging over my shoulder from behind. I grinned to myself when I noticed the 5 very deep scratches that raked across his face from his right jaw, through his eye, and ending above his nose. "Now, where are those keys?" I taunted Doyle with a proud grin as I snaked my fingers into his suit jacket pocket, my fingers brushing against rough edges. "There they are." Doyle's eyes were rock hard and glaring daggers up at me as I unchained myself, pleased when the silver hit the floor. An idea formed in my mind, and I clasped the chains around Doyle's own wrists and neck, hoping that nasty little mark I made will be a nice reminder for him. "It was a pleasure, Doyle," I smirked as I stood, turning to the door. "It's not over. I know where it is now, and I will have it." I froze to glance back at the babbling rogue, raising an eyebrow at him. I shook off the slyness in his voice and left him in the tiny, dark, damp, hellish cell to let him have a taste of his own medicine. What I had to do then was return to the pack house and slaughter Damon. Chapter 37. 6 feet of Hellcasey SP. OV. The cement floor was frigid beneath my bare feet. I was in a house, in the effing basement. That's all I knew. And by the looks of it, it was a very large house with a very expansive basement. Getting fed up from running around like a lost puppy for a few minutes, I was maybe the happiest person on earth when I saw wooden stairs leading up to a doorway. Sprinting to my escape, the wooden stairs creaking under my weight. But then the doorknob turned before I could grab it. I gasped, looking around for a place to hide. There was no possible way I could fight a rogue in the condition I was in and have a whole bunch more on my tail. Flicking out my claws, I held my breath as I climbed under the stairs, digging into the wood and remaining as still as I could. The door swung open and Matt, I think his name was, lazily walked down the stairs, whistling along as he did. I bit my lip, hoping he couldn't smell me and my emanating heat. Thankfully, he didn't seem to notice me or my scent and kept walking, unfortunately towards the room our mutual friend was chained up in. Quick to act, I kicked my feet over and my body followed, now on my hands and knees on the stairs. I didn't hesitate, however, before carefully slipping out the door, finding myself in an expensive-looking kitchen. For perverted sleaze, the guy made a lot of money in order to afford the house. But that moment was the time to gawk at the marble-styled kitchen. Hunched down low, I sprinted across the kitchen, the air reeking of male wolf. I gagged, trying to cover myself with the torn dress shirt as much as I could while sneaking out of the kitchen and into a main hall. The grand, dark oak front door screaming my name at the end. I heard more voices echoing down the hall from behind me and took that as my hint to get the hell out of there. I reached the brass door handle, a surge of excitement running through me, but then a bullet flew by my ear, lodging into the door barely an inch beside my head. I whipped around to see Doyle and Matt standing in the doorway of the kitchen. Doyle had a gun raised up, smoke still flowing in a light stream from the barrel. "It's not going to be that easy, sweetheart," Doyle hissed, half of his face painted red with blood. "It's never that easy." I couldn't find any words. I was just stunned to think of any. I looked around at the gathering rogues, questioning my escape plan. Then, a pair of ghastly grey eyes caught mine and a painfully familiar face winced at our eye contact. "Throw this on," Doyle demanded gruffly. momentarily pulling my attention away from the unmistakable face. As Matt threw me a large grey t-shirt, I glanced back at the place where the grey eyes were and was stunned to see that they were gone. Shaking off the haunting chill that evaded my body, I turned back to Doyle and, keeping my eyes locked on him, I removed the shredded dress shirt, earning myself some catcalls and wolf whistles from the other curious rogues who had walked into the room to see what was going on, and stubbornly threw on the new shirt, pleased that it covered me completely from my shoulders to my knees. "That's a good girl. Now what?" I heard Matt whisper quietly to Doyle. I raised my eyebrow, curious myself what Doyle had planned to do next. Now Doyle paused, beginning to advance towards me. "We negotiate. Damon's P.O.V. This could not get any more screwed up," I moaned, burying my face in my hands, sitting back at the council table with Ben, Diana, Amber, Dan, Owen, and Jenna. "Tell me about it," Amber sighed, tying her hair back into a ponytail. "If we don't do it, the rogues surely will," Diana snapped, dead set on saving her daughter back. "Even if it means disturbing my mother's resting body," Diana's got a point. Oh, unstated. "We should get to the necklace before they can get their paws on it. We need to act soon. The longer we sit around, knowing what it is and where it is, the longer they have Casey, and the more twisted and psychotic acts they could be doing to her." Amber chimed in, bringing her fist down on the table. I growled at her statement, detesting the very idea that my mate was suffering. But I stopped myself, thinking it was Blazy. "Your e-mate is probably dying. Tu es agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nogan. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing enthusiasm. And you still don't give a crap. What the hell is wrong with you?" I argued with myself, disgusted and conflicted. Casey Blazy was my mate, and though it defied my human side, maybe I should just give in. I couldn't keep fighting her forever. "Fine," I growled, standing from my chair. "Then grab a shovel. Owen, go start the SUV. Might as well get this over with," I muttered, watching the two men quickly exit the room, Dan and the girls all standing from the table. "Wait, you're actually telling me your Ida's going to hand over the necklace?" Amber's eyes shot daggers at me. I nodded. "That's what you want me to do, don't you?" "No offense, Alpha," Amber sighed, slapping a hand over her eyes. "But you can be so stupid sometimes. Care to elaborate?" I snarled, down throwing Amber a confused look. "Do you really think that giving this rogue dude a powerful necklace will get him to hand over Casey?" "Yes, a rogue. Rogues don't play fair. I don't see what you're getting at," Dan claimed. Amber gave him a synthetic look. "Sweetie, you need to watch more overt affairs," she cooed to him before looking back towards me. "They won't give Casey up. Once they have what they want, they'll kill Casey, then come after us. Whoever acts against them will die, and they'll take everyone else." I stared at her while my mind soaked up what she said and the likeliness of it. "Our odds were not looking good. What do you think we should do then, Amber the genius?" "I still think we should get the necklace, but then make the rogues think we want to trade. They'll have to tell us where Casey is when they see we have the moon fragment," Dan offered, looking back and forth between me and Amber. "It's worth a shot, but no matter what, I expect to have Casey standing beside me very much alive." Dan and Amber stared at me with expressionless faces, one of Amber's eyebrows raised. "Dude, seriously, because it bothering the shit out of me. What the heck with the sudden change of interest?" Amber crossed her arms, her ponytail swaying behind her. "I don't have a change in interest. In protecting my pack." Dan pondered, pursing his lips as he placed his hands on his sides. So if I was the kidnapped, you'd be doing the exact same thing. Yeah. I don't believe you, Amber claimed. Well, I don't give a damn, I returned. Admit it, Damon. Amber drawled, slowly prowling toward me. You love her. You mated her and now you'd go to anything just to have her back. I don't have to explain anything to you, I snapped, towering over the petite female beta. However, I noticed out of the corner of my eye that Dan's muscles were tense and he was prepared to strike any second in defense of his mate. You don't need to. You're an open book, Damon. It's scribbled in Sharpie across your face. I'm Alpha Dame Enthralling and I'm in love with Casey Blazy. The redhead smacked up at me with glowing ice blue eyes, a sense of knowledge reflected in them. Dan, take your mate and get ready before I do something I might regret later, I demanded through clenched teeth, not pulling my eyes from Amber's. To my agent extraordinaire, Myelin Nilbe, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I'd like to see you try to do something. You coward. Amber spat before Dan could even grab her. Dan, I'm going to count to 3. If she's not away by then, you'll do something you'll never forgive me for. 1. Dan grabbed Amber's arms and began to pull her away, but she struggled against his grip, trying to lunge for me. 2, I breathed, feeling my fists begin to ball up. Amber was kicking and hissing in Dan's arms, deliberately trying to start a fight. Pinching the bridge of my nose and sighing when the door closed. Amber screaming in the hallway and inaudibly trying to calm her down. Was it just me, or was it that every girl I knew was always searching for a way to set me off? Chapter 38, The Red Dace Damon's P.O.V. The full moon lingered in the ink-black sky over our heads, illuminating the graveyard around us as if shaming us for what we were doing. Ben and Doyle were in a 3-foot-deep hole in front of my mother's headstone, digging loads of dirt over the sides. When they bring her up, do you want me to grab the necklace? Dan asked me, standing beside me with tired yet expressionless eyes, his arms crossed. I shook my head. No, I need to do it, I replied with a strained jaw. Dan just nodded silently, his eyes steady on the deepening hole. Amber, Diana, and Jana were a few feet behind us under a looming willow tree, talking in hushed whispers. A haunting breeze brushed along my arms and sent goosebumps racing along my exposed skin. Both Ben's and Owen's expressions were grave as they got ever closer. I breathed in heavily, blowing out a tired sigh. I wished for it to be over soon. I was just so sick of conflicted feelings and fearful blood coursing through my veins. Casey, I loved her. I hated her. The rogues toying with my feelings, toying with Casey's life. Just thinking about it made me believe I smelt cherry and spice. To my agent extraordinaire, Myelin Nilbe, heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm. Owen called from the grave. I looked down to see the 2 men brushing remaining dirt off of the smooth mahogany coffin, the old wood still able to gleam under the moon. Great. Bring her up. To my agent extraordinaire, Myelin Nilbe, heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm. Watching anxiously while both the men heaved the heavy casket over the side, resting it on the mint-green grass. With a sigh, I kneeled beside it, feeling Dan and the girls crowd around behind me. With quaking fingers, I pried the top open, dust spilling out in a grey cloud. I coughed, trying to fan away the lingering dust before forcing myself to look at the decaying skin and bones that was my mother. God, Mother Nature works fast. Amber breathed, peering down at the greyish, green skin and caved eyes. I threw her a glare before I took notice to the gleaming chain that clung to the thin, shriveled neck. Holding my breath, I reached behind the fragile head and carefully pulled the necklace off, holding it up in front of me. The gold still shone as if it had been freshly polished, the onyx looking as though it was giving off its own glow. The twisted and curled engravings were deep, some even exhibiting the smooth black stone inside. The chain almost seemed to vibrate in my fist when the silver beams of the moon reached the heart. For Damon, thank you dearly for doing the hefty lifting for us. Enthusiasm in my old days, that would have been just backbreaking. I looked up to see a man that seemed to be in his 50s staring at me with glacier blue eyes. Half his face appeared as though he was recently mauled by a savage bear, his left eye red except for the iris. He wore an expensive-looking black silk suit with a hellish red dress shirt and a black robe tie, coming on quite demonic. "Who the hell are you?" I snarled, clutching the necklace tie-tie in my hand. The elder laughed a deep venomous chuckle. "Why, Elfafalon, enthusiasm, in the man holding your mate's life in his hand," before giving a nod of his head. Casey stumbled out of the shadows, wearing nothing but a grey shirt, a tall man violently gripping her arm. Diana shrieked, taking notice to the blood stains on her shirt and the fresh blood gliding down the side of her face and down her bruised and battered legs. She could barely stand on her own, the other man practically keeping her up by her bound arms. "What have you done to her?" I howled, my instinct triggered and my wolf on the edge of my skin, my claws and fangs snapping out in a second. "What she got coming to her?" The rogue returned, turning his head to the right so to reveal the full extent of the left side of his face. "But enough of her. Hand over the necklace." "Don't do it, Damon," Casey gasped, glancing up at me through dampened hair that hung in front of her face. The rogue tightened his grip on her arm and she winced, clearly defying the whimpering that tried to erupt from her throat. "Be a good pup, and hand me the necklace or I'll make sure you can watch your sweet mate die," the rogue growled, extending his open palm. "Don't do it, Damon," Amber instructed. I could feel her eyes clawing at the back of my head, almost trying to reach inside and do all the thinking and acting herself. "Quit thinking about it and just do it," the rogue yelled, his hand beginning to tremble with anxious rage. I must be hesitated for a moment too long because what happened after that was a chaotic hell. "Owen, grab the fragment," the old man cried and the chain was ripped from my hand as a blow to my head knocked me off my feet. I saw Owen's back retreating towards the rogue as a sudden shriek rang out. I looked towards Diana, her face pale and eyes wide. The rogue who had Casey in his grip had pulled a knife from his pocket, the blade glinterously under the moon. "Matt, put her out," the older man ordered, and time seemed to move in slow motion before my eyes. Matt pulled the knife back before he plunged it into Casey's back, her eyes almost bulging out of her head. Her legs gave out and the rogue let her drop to the ground. Diana released a blood-curdling scream as she darted towards her daughter, Amber crying out and Don's face darkening, his mouth slightly gaped. I watched, stunned, as Owen, Matt, and the elder ran into the darkness, the necklace still gleaming in his fist. I sucked in a breath and sprinted towards Casey's crumpled body, a pool of blood pooling around her. Locking eyes with the frightened healer. Hesitating for a mere second, she met me beside Casey and quickly went to work. It was when Jenna flipped Casey over that I felt a lump from in my throat. Her face was covered in jagged scratches like she had been beaten with several different weapons. Her lip was split and a stream of blood ran freely from her mouth, still wet. Her arms and legs were covered in dark purple and green bruises, deep welts still leaking blood. Chest still breathing, Jenna reported as Diana, Dan, Ben, and Amber all came and gathered around the bloody mess that was once a beautiful girl. Will she be all right? Amber questioned, tears gliding down her cheeks. Jenna looked Katie's body once more, her expression grim and her eyes sad. They'll need to get her back to the pack house, she numbly replied. "Diana, could you help me?" "No, I should be there with her," I nursed, getting to my feet to tower over the slim healer. "You should be going after the rogues that did this to her," Jana argued, looking to Diana to start helping her lift Casey up. "Just standing around and hovering over my shoulder won't do any good." "She's right, bro." Dan agreed. I knew Amber and Ben were right behind him. I growled, but knew she was right. With a howl, I shifted and ran into the darkness, feeding the others on my tail. The scent was still fresh and I was sure they weren't far ahead of us. Headstones on either side of us flew by in grey blurs, haunting statues reaching out to us. The graveyard extended on for miles with the rogues anywhere among it. Maniacal laughter suddenly rang out over our heads. I skidded to a stop, my ears perking as my head lowered defensively. Dan sniffed the air effortlessly, Amber and Ben peering around with wary eyes. "Have a death wish," Pup the leader's voice cackled, echoing around my ears. Other laughter joined in, seeming to come from everywhere. "Funny, that's what the young fee made hours ago." "Wants to join his mate, no doubt," a new voice responded, most likely that of Matt's, the one who had stabbed my mate. I always knew he was persistent, even a bit mental. Owen scoffed, all their voices seeming to rain down from the sky. I bared my teeth with a menacing snarl, slowly crawling forward and scanning the area for them. A fog was beginning to roll in and soon concealed my paws from view, making our search all the more complicated. Shadows shifted in the fog, moving quickly between headstones. Their laughter sounded like those of a hyena, wild and psychotic. "So, did you enjoy it?" the elder questioned. "I mean, watching the life drain out of your mate's eyes." A feral snarl forced its way through my clenched teeth, the hairs between my shoulders bristling. Suddenly, a cry sailed up into the night. I snapped my head towards Amber, who had the jaws of Owen wrapped tightly around her throat. She whimpered as she tried to fight him off, but at the angle he had her it was impossible for her to cram her head around that far. However, Dan tore a chunk of flesh from Owen's side faster than the eye could follow. Howling in pain, Owen released Amber before he snapped towards Dan, his carnivorous teeth clapping as they snapped together. "Damon," Amber cried, her eyes wide and staring right past me. I turned just as a large clawed paw came down hard against my neck, the force beating me to the ground. I looked back up at an abnormally huge, black, straight grey wolf. His eyes were wild and vicious as they smirked at me. I snarled menacingly back at the wolf as I took notice to the one red iron-scarred muzzle. "Hello there, pup," the wolf actually said through the mind link, his voice hauntingly rough and low. It was a moment later that I noticed the locket around the creature's neck, an ominous silver glow coming from inside the heart. Then, ignoring my instincts and ego and hoping for help, "A little busy at the moment," he replied, though strained. I noticed out of the corner of my eye that Wilden and Amber fought Owen. Ben was snapping his jaws violently with a mangy brown wolf who could have only been Matt. I mentally groaned, returning my eyes to that of the elder. With a snarl, I kicked my hind legs into his sensitive stomach and felt my claws break flesh, dragging them down the length of his belly. He released a monstrous cry as he pulled back, allowing me to lunge for him. I plunged my canines into his neck and clenched tightly, letting the blood fill my mouth. He roared as he sent his puff line across my muzzle, tearing me away from my grip and taking a piece of flesh with me. "Incompetent pup," the elder breathed. "You think your innocent clawing and biting will hurt me?" Just as he said that, fresh skin and fur rapidly began to spread over the wounds on his neck and stomach, making them appear better than new. He came for me again, this time tackling me into a marble headstone. He cackled as he dragged his claws across my neck, leaving deep welts. I bit back the whimper as I caught his flank in my mouth, feeling the crunch of bone. He so much as whimpered when he captured my shoulder in his jaws. Damon, get the necklace off of him, Amber erected, sounding like she was in pain. Genius. I should have thought of that. Oh wait, I did. Then what the FF is taking you so long? Sherlock, she snapped impatiently. I mentally rolled my eyes as I positioned my jaw higher up on his leg, biting down again and hearing the snapping of more bone. It's more effing complicated than you think, I argued, feeling his teeth rip through muscle, warm blood cascading down my arm. I heard an echoing snap emanate from behind my opponent but couldn't see what had happened. Two wolves pounced onto the rogue's back, the tan wolf's teeth hooking onto his shoulder and the misty grey wolf's jaws wrapping around his neck. The rogue cried out, faltering backwards with the two wolves clinging onto him. Get the mother effing necklace, Amber and Dan commanded in unison. Ignoring the burning pain in my shoulder, I lashed out for his neck and watched as the heart fell to the ground in front of me. The rogue howled as he thrashed violently, knocking Amber and Dan off of him. His eyes bore hate fully into mine before he sprinted at full speed towards the looming trees in the distance, a limping and bleeding mutt far behind. Eat them, Ben stated, giving me a hard look just as I was about to chase after them. KCS and the pack's well-being at the moment is more important. Knowing he was right, I was about to argue. The elder and his henchmen would be back. It's a wolf's habit to always come back and collect what has been stolen of your pride and dignity. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I got to my feet, staring at the motionless naked human body barely visible in the fog. It was Owen, his neck twisted at an impossible angle, his eyes wide open yet staring at nothing. His body was torn and shredded, decorated with bite and claw marks. No time to gawk. Amber said almost darkly, her golden eyes glaring at me. Grab the locket and get your effing ass back to the effing pack house, she demanded. I noticed that she was putting all her weight to her right paw, her left paw covered in blood and a bit of bone peeking through the flesh. I didn't get the chance to observe what Ben Ord Ann looked like before Amber growled at me, her eyes warning that she shouldn't be tested. I grabbed the locket between my teeth and dashed towards the pack house, using my pain to fuel my speed. Don't miss the next chapter of this gripping tale. Make sure you're subscribed and hit the notification bell